In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrance and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrance and Sandy.
Hello and welcome to the Lunch with Sandy podcast. I'm Terrance.
And I'm Sandy.
And as usual, here on the Lunch with Sandy podcast, we are having the conversations that married couples need to have. Today, we're going to be having a conversation about some of the things that might be overrated. But before we get into that, let's take care of some house cleaning. And speaking of cleaning, Sandy, how are you doing today?
Well, seeing that I've been sick for like a week.
Listen, stay away from my bike. I don't want you passing none of your germs on to my other lady.
Mm-hmm. It's all right. I already coughed on her multiple times.
See, and that's why you'll never get along.
She was fine with it.
That's why we won't be able to ride together.
Yeah. You know.
She's going to pull off on you.
No, I don't know. She was fine.
Nah, she wasn't.
She didn't resent me for it.
Well, I do. Anyway, now that Sandy has spilled the beans about coughing on my bike that she'll never be able to get next to again, we are going to start the show off like we do every week, and we're going to start with the spotlight of the week. This week, I want to shine the light on a couple of individuals. First off, I got to give a shout out to my man, Joseph Sanchez, affectionately known as Jose. Jose is first off, solid dude. Every Sunday, he makes sure that he stays with that B group. He is a phenomenal husband. Yes. Not mine.
They just celebrated their 20th anniversary.
Yes, happy anniversary to Jose and Yaz. Great father and overall great human being. Also owner of Sanchez Liquors down there on the corner of Atwells Ave and Manton Ave. So I wanted to give a shout out to Jose because that's my guy. And another shout out goes out to my man, Anthony L. Sanders, my brother from another mother.
My birthday.
Your birthday, brother. Your birthday brother. Anthony's just Anthony. You know, he came up with the swagadocious hats that I showed you, although you said one was very, very bright. But listen, sometimes the only way they can see you in the dark is if you're shining bright.
You know, if you're going hiking, it's the perfect color for sure.
Look.
When you want to be seen.
If you want to be seen.
Yeah, that's what you wear. Rock
that hat right there.
Right.
That hat is fresh. All right. So let me get into what it is I'm about to get into. And I'm sure this has happened to many of us. People, you know, may talk up some experience that they've had. And because of the way that they describe that experience, you have to experience for yourself. You get all amped up because you don't want to be left out from that phenomenal experience, right? And it could be related to anything. It could be food. It could be a restaurant. It could be a TV show. It doesn't really matter. Everyone at some point wants to have the opportunity to take advantage of that experience. But as it turns out, you have that experience and it doesn't meet your expectations.
It's like the reverse of one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Well, to you, you know, it's overrated. To you, that experience has been described, you know, as being much better than it actually is. Mm-hmm. So today I want to have the conversation about things that may be overrated, but I want to look at it from the perspective of being in a relationships.
Okay.
And I meant relationships.
Wow.
I mean, listen, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. You've seen them shows. Relationships. So I definitely feel, and before I get too far down, when I talk about it might be important to define the term overrated. And that's not to say that the experience or that the particular aspect doesn't hold water or isn't a good experience. It's just that some people, in some ways, have described it so much to the point where it just can't live up to
the expectation.
That description, that expectation. And I think that there are definitely certain aspects of a relationship that are overrated. And saying that, I'm going to get into the very first one that I have on my list, because I know if I didn't throw that perception piece in there, then, people might be like, what are you talking about? But I do think that in some cases in a relationship, happiness is overrated. You laugh.
You don't want to be happy in a relationship. Just kidding.
When I say that, let me define what I mean. There are people who look to a relationship for happiness.
Yeah.
And then when you get in that relationship,
you're like,
chances are you're not as happy as you expected to be. Uh-huh. And part of that is because the expectation is that happiness is going to come from being in a relationship. And you know what I say about that.
Yeah.
If you can't find happiness within yourself,
right,
you're going to have a hard time finding it from someone else. And again, remember, when I talk about these things, perception is a big part of that. And I do think that some people perceive that being in a relationship is going to make you happy. And I think that's overrated, because that is not always the case. And I don't think that a relationship itself
can make you miserable.
Well, I mean, it can make you miserable, but I mean, I do think that there are people who go into it thinking that, oh, this is going to be glorious. It's going to be.
Or if I'm with this person, I'd be so happy.
Yeah. And I think that's that when you talk about what I described as being overrated.
Yeah.
I think it does end up being overrated in some cases, because that perception of what it's going to be doesn't measure up. Yeah. So I think happiness can be overrated when you talk about it in a relationship. The other thing that I think is so overrated, people talk about it all the time. I hear people say, oh, well, we have so much in common. And, they say opposites attract. If your whole goal is to be with someone who is just like you, and I don't mean someone just like you, but doing the same things with each other, I think that can get boring really quickly. I think there are times when people say, oh, well, you guys don't have anything in common. I think that that's just so overrated, because you don't have to have all the same desires, the same hobbies to actually work for each other.
Yeah. So do you think we have more things in common, or are we more opposites attract?
I think it would take too long to answer that question.
But I get that, because sometimes I'm like, I wish you would enjoy going hiking and we could go hike together.
And I say, nah, G.
Yeah, exactly. Like going to the beach, I want to try kayaking. I want to try stand up paddling, whatever it's called.
It's called paddleboarding, and you can try all those things.
I know, but I mean, to me, it's like, I think it would be nice if you also enjoyed doing those things or wanted to try those things, because then we could do it together.
Well, sometimes a man has to walk his path alone.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. And sometimes a woman has to paddle alone. And I think that you need to get fine with that. Listen, I've said this before, and we've had this conversation. It's good to have things that are yours that you do on your own. I think when we talk about common things, I think there are certain things that we actually do the same that we've probably started doing because we were together. You get what I'm saying? Like, we both bike, we both run, those things. And those things we have in common, but I think that commonality has come from us being together. But at the same time, there are things that we're not just going to enjoy doing. And hiking is going to be one of those. And going to the beach is going to be another one of those. And standing on a paddle and paddling out in the water, That's going to be another one of those. That's not to say that you can't get out there and enjoy your
Just make
woods and
more
water
friends.
life.
I just have to find hiking friends and paddleboarding friends.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing about that is it gives you the opportunity to become more friendly with yourself. I'm all about providing you with opportunities.
Oh, thanks.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Always thinking about me. Thanks.
Yes, I'm that guy. I'm that guy.
But, so I agree that if you're doing everything together and you're pretty much like attached at the hip, like, is that just too much? At some point, a lot becomes too much. But, as we continue to, what's the right word I'm looking for? Age with grace, and the kids are all out of the house, it would be nice to do more things together because all these years we really haven't done a lot together.
I think we do enough together.
Well,
they say the heart grows fonder when it's away.
well, I'll always go out to eat without you, so that's a definite.
Exactly. See? You go out to eat all the time without me.
I sure do.
Yeah. And do I complain about it?
No.
I don't ever say, well, I wish you would stay home and eat with me.
No, you don't complain.
Yeah, as you get older and I get better, we can work on finding some other things that we can partake in
Well, we started
partly together.
biking together.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, that
I
might
guess we
change
got
after
that.
you was breathing on my bike. That might change. I might have to kick it to the curb. The other thing, or another thing that you hear all the time, and in some cases it makes sense, but I do think that in other cases it's overrated. And that is the whole thing of you have to make sure you maintain a spark, or there's always a spark.
Okay.
Well, think about it. Every individual is different.
Uh-huh.
What's a spark to you might be a forest fire to somebody else. Right? So when you're trying to keep a spark alive, you're burning down somebody's village. And I get the aspect, you should enjoy being with your partner. Mm-hmm. You should be excited when you see your partner. But I think it's more important to focus on maintaining and building a connection as opposed to, oh, well, we got to get spicy, or there's no more spark and we got to do all these exciting things. I think that's overrated because, again, you said it, as you get older and I get better, the way that we move within the world changes.
Yep.
You might not be as nimble as me anymore.
It's the reverse.
Well, I don't know about that. But anyway, that's a topic for another conversation. But again, I think because every individual is different, I think you can force on someone things that you might look at it from the perspective of, oh, well, we need to do this to keep our love aflame,
alive,
or yeah,
Isn't
the
that
spark
the
alive,
saying?
as opposed to someone else. Listen, man, I'm with you all the time. I tell you I love you, this, that, and the other. We got this amazing connection. Why are you trying to set my house on fire?
And you don't think that connection is kind of what they're referring to as the spark?
No. When a connection is a connection, you can have a connection and it just be that connection from the perspective of, look, you finish my sentences, or you know what I'm going to say before I say it, or we're in sync when we talk about what it is we want to do, this, that, and the other.
Okay.
That whole spark thing is, oh yeah, well, we got to go do something exciting. We got to go, let's go dance every night. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. And it's different based on the individuals. But at the same time, I think that from that perspective, spark can be overrated because, one, there's not one single definition for it. Mm-hmm. But when most people talk about, oh, well, we've lost that spark, we don't do this anymore, or, he doesn't jump over cars when he sees me and all that other crazy stuff.
I come home to the door and he's not wagging his tail at me. Like,
I didn't understand nothing you just said.
sorry, I'm thinking of Jax, when he come home and he's just always at the door wagging his tail.
Exactly. He don't wag his tail when I come home to the door.
But yeah, no, I guess there is a difference between spark and just still being into one another.
Exactly.
Especially as you continue to age and I'm the one that's getting more nimbler.
I don't know about that.
I feel like especially the amount of time that you've been together, right? It can slowly diminish. But I think as long as you're remain into each other,
I think just from the perspective
it's not like as exciting as it was when we first met, right? But as long as you remain into one another, isn't that what's most important?
Well, yeah, and you got to think about this too. You say it's not exciting when you don't know each other, and at the same time, you're not. The relationship is in its It's in its infancy. I was about to say intimacy. It's in its infancy, and as you grow and change, your relationship grows and change. When I talk about that term spark being overrated, I think too often people look at other people's relationships and look at, oh well, they do this, they do that, and you don't really see the whole aspect of their relationship. And you look at that and you say, oh wow, there's a fire there. There's something there that we don't have, and it gets focused on and overrated because now you're taking that piece that you see from somewhere else and you're forgetting about that connection that you actually have, that you've built, that it took years and years to form. And I talked about this last week. It's so easy to focus on the negative that you forget about all the positives. And when you talk about something being missing, you're only focusing on what's missing and not what's actually there. And that's why I think that from the perspective of when people talk about you need that spark, I think it's overrated.
Yeah. Like, these people have been together just as long as us. How come he holds my hand but you won't?
I told you before, I don't want to take you down. That's why holding hands must go. It's dangerous. It's right. It's dangerous.
But you're right. I think, honestly, I think the thing that hurts relationships the most is always comparing your relationship to somebody else's.
And I think that's born from, again, looking at aspects of someone else's relationship or how someone else describes them being in a relationship. And you want that experience, but then come to find out, it ain't all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, like you've been reading romance novels all your life and you get into
Exactly. That's why I stopped reading. Stop reading them romance novels.
I don't read those, but I'm just saying they can get kind of, expectations can get kind of warped if that's what you think all relationships are like.
Yeah. Another one that, and this, I'm going to say, and I can't speak for the younger generation now, but when I was younger, it was definitely looks. When talking about a relationship, the first thing, and it's hard, right? Because one of the first things that you notice about somebody is what they look like.
Yeah, well, obviously you couldn't avoid that with me.
Well, yeah, anyway. Anyway, I must stay on topic here. You don't have insight to who someone is until you actually get to know them. But when you first see them, that first thing that catches your eye is their appearance.
Yep.
Now, the funny thing about that is they can be the most gorgeous person in the world and at the same time be the ugliest person in the world.
Yep.
But so many people, and I don't know, it's probably part, society or whatever, but so many people focus on what's on the outside and how someone looks.
Yep.
And when it comes to how well that translate within a relationship, how well that translate into a supportive partner, that is greatly overrated.
Oh, for sure.
Because you don't know what you're getting if you start your relationship off and it's just based on looks. Now, there's probably going to be more things that come along once you get to know each other. But if the way to open a door is based on how a person looks, then it's overrated because, again, you have no way of knowing what it is that you're actually going to get outside of, oh, he looks good.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there has to be some level of attraction there. Maybe he doesn't need to be,
Well, attraction, yeah.
Greek god.
Attraction is not necessarily just from looks.
Yeah, true.
So that's why I say from the perspective of looks, it's overrated because, again, attraction comes in many shapes and forms. And again, you can be attracted to someone based off something that they did, something that they said, how they smell. Now, you can also be unattracted to someone based on how they smell or what they said and those other things. But the point that I'm trying to make is too often I hear and I see people look at someone and say, wow.
I want that.
I want that. I want that. I mean, they don't say those so many words, but they're basing that initial attraction on the way that someone looks.
Well,
and there's nothing wrong with someone being attractive. I just think, again, we're talking about from a perception perspective, some aspects of a relationship that are overrated. And I do think that looks are overrated.
Shouldn't be everything. However, when we were at the bike store.
Yeah, she was pretty. I didn't listen. Again,
it was all based on looks, and then the ride.
It wasn't that. There were other aspects of it. It was the two-seater.
Yes.
You talk about doing things together.
All looks at first.
You're talking
it was
functionality.
It was the two-seater.
Functionality.
How soft the seats looked.
You were talking about doing things together. With a two-seater, we can do that together.
Right.
Yes. Now, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, because you know how we have a tendency to get stuck on those things, the last thing that I want to talk about from the perspective of being overrated, and this one here, it's going to throw a lot of people, and that is weddings, comma, the concept of marriage itself. And let me explain what I mean. I'm going to tackle the wedding piece first. Weddings are beautiful. They cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money, a ton of money. And then after one day, it's over. Now, I'm not talking about getting married, right? I'm talking about the big wedding.
Yep.
Because now, when you start thinking about, okay, well, we got married. Now we have to start building our lives together.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a hole.
Yep.
And let me take that back. You might not be in a hole, but you just took a large sum of money, used it on one particular day when you could have used that for something else. And the idea is because historically, or because from a society's perspective, or because from a family's perspective, we had to have this wedding to celebrate us coming together.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed every moment of our wedding. I think weddings are overrated. And I'm just being honest.
I think to some degree you're correct. I personally, even when we were getting married, I didn't want the big wedding, to be honest. I'd rather just us been barefoot on a beach.
See, there you go with the beach again.
Because I love the beach. The sun setting behind us. Think of those amazing pictures it would have been. And getting married. It
rained on the day we got married.
Just a little bit. But, to me, that would have been more of my ideal situation, right? Like small, intimate, just being able to enjoy us and the people we were with. And that's exactly what happened the opposite of exactly what happened at our wedding that I knew was going to happen. So one, it took a tremendous amount of time to plan this wedding. You're right? Over a year. And then
it comes and it goes.
And then it comes and it goes, right? So quickly. We had over 300 guests. I know I did not talk to all 300 guests.
I might have.
You might have. You did float around more than me. But So it just felt, in my opinion, too large. Like I still enjoyed our wedding immensely, obviously, but it was a great time. But I could have did with less.
So here's the question you have to ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
You take two people or two groups of people. One has a big wedding. One does not.
Mm-hmm.
5 years down the road, what does one have that the other doesn't have? Take everything else out, because there's all these different factors that can, determine those things. But everything being equal, the only thing that you have is maybe the memories of the people who you were there with. But memories are something that you can build regardless.
Just have a videographer.
Yeah. And I'm not saying people don't get married. What I'm saying is weddings are overrated.
Yeah. Especially big ones.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that the feelings that you get from being around those individuals who you love and who love you are overrated. I'm talking about the concept of a weddings. They can be overrated. Now, let's get to the second part of that.
Okay.
Because the second part of that has more to deal with where we are today. And when I say we, I don't mean me and you. I'm talking about from a societal perspective. The concept of marriage, there's a large number of individuals, or there's a large percentage of individuals who get divorced.
Yep.
The trend tends to be that people are now committing to long-term relationships to each other without actually getting married.
Yeah.
And so that causes me to raise the question, because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And obviously, if they don't feel that there's anything wrong with that, then anyone else's opinion really doesn't matter. But that raises the question for me, is the concept of marriage now overrated?
I don't know. To me, I feel like marriage is important, and it could just be my beliefs as a Catholic.
I think it might be.
That, am I okay living in a long-term relationship? Yes. But at the end of the day, I would have still wanted to get married. Whether we went to the justice of the peace, whether, you know what I mean, and got married. Well, actually, I wouldn't even say justice of the peace. I think the important thing would be just going into a church, getting married. Whether we had a wedding or not is irrelevant. However, I think the concept of the actual marriage would still be important to me. But you're right. Not everybody's the same.
And I'm not saying not important. What I will, let me first follow up on, I think that for you, that is a big part of your belief system. Not everyone goes to church. I could ask the question, although this is not really a relationship, is the whole concept of going to church overrated? And I'm not going down that road, but what I am saying is this. You don't need a piece of paper or someone telling you what you are to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And then when you start to think about it, that's really the concept, right? You got to go to the town hall. They give you this certificate, and you go to church, and he says, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mm-hmm. The reality is you can make that commitment with your partner regardless of all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that...
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I think for me, the important part is... my beliefs was just going to the church and saying your vows. Everything else to me is pretty irrelevant. So I guess to your point, if it's not on paper, then it technically wouldn't be a legal marriage, and it wouldn't make it less important.
Exactly. And I think the important part of it is this: how you define your relationship with that other person. And I think that, and I'm not saying, hey, let's go get unmarried. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is now the world is more accepting to all these different views. And it should be. It should have been a lot. It should have been, a long time ago. But with that comes changes in how people do things and how people feel about things. And if you notice, and I don't know how you would notice, but, I'm around some of these younger folk. The time frame for what it is they're doing is getting longer and longer. And by that, what I mean is they're waiting longer to have kids. They're waiting longer to decide if they want to get married. Some of them aren't getting married. They're just making sure that they commit to each other and commit to what it is that they mean to each other, which is just as, in my eyes, just as good. Because again, you can get married and be the worst spouse ever.
Oh, for sure.
Because based on how you, that piece of paper or going into that church, that's not going to determine how well you're committed to the other person. Only you can do that, and only the other person can do that. So from that perspective, I can say that the concept of marriage might be a bit overrated.
From that perspective, yeah. I feel like it can be. I think it really also just depends on what's important to each person.
It does. And so let's jump off from that then, right? So when you talk about what's so important to each person, why is it that romantic relationships are so highly regarded? And I guess the real question is, or the other part about that question is, are they still?
Elaborate on that one.
So I think there are a lot of people that, and I mentioned this earlier, I think there are a lot of people that feel they can find happiness from someone else.
Oh, that part.
They romanticize that whole thing.
Yes.
And the challenge is, again, it's not like those books.
Right.
You romanticize something, or you hold something in such a high regard because you believe it to be something that it might not be able to live up to.
Yeah.
But yet people continue to actually do that.
No, agreed. I don't know if you would still define this as a romantic relationship. I think it still is, I guess. But
when I say romantic relationships, I'm talking about, I'm not talking about a relationship with you and a coworker or you and a friend. I'm talking about that concept of being.
Right. That's where I was going to go. Like, I think what's most important is finding somebody that you just want to be with, like whatever that entails. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily have to be like, the whole spark and, a romance novel and whatnot. The important thing is that you like each other and like to spend time together and that you're a cohesive unit.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because for a second, when I was talking about the reasons for, like, I think some of those reasons are why people hold romantic relationships in such a high regard. Part of it is society. Part of it is history. A part of it can be, and this is where I thought you were going, part of it can be the fear of being alone.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I think people sometimes on the outside looking in, they look to romantic relationships and they're like, well, that's the marriage that's going to last forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're so in love with one another. When you see, I don't know, these like older couples and they're still like, staring lovely into each other's eyes.
Now, well, you know what the challenge with that is? So from the outside looking in, it looks like they're staring lovingly into each other's eyes. But you don't know what daggers they're sending into each other. That might be the look, you know what, when we get out of public, we're going to go fisticuffs. Now, it's probably not. But again, I think it goes back to that whole point of when you look at other people's relationships, you only see a glimpse of what it is that it is.
Right.
And typically, you're not going to be out in public without your best foot forward. You know what I mean?
What are you talking about?
I
try to put the worst show on for everybody.
You might be out there with, that back foot forward, but most of the time you're probably not.
Oh yeah, no. I want to be like, why is he with her?
Oh goodness. Oh goodness. I think that there are a number of reasons why romantic relationships are highly regarded. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be highly regarded. I think that the reason has to be the correct reason, right? If you're in a relationship and that person makes you feel so much more than what you did prior to, then you should hold that relationship in high regard.
Yep.
But going into something without having that experience, or when I say that experience, I mean with that individual or with any individual, and you have it up to here, I think that you're just setting yourself up for
Failure.
disappointment. I'm not even going to say failure because,
No,
I
disappointment
guess
is
success
probably
is
a
getting
better
into
word.
the actual relationship. But if it's not cracked up, if it's not all you expected it to be, the question becomes, okay, well, was your expectation set too high? And if so, why? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that I will mention when it comes to romantic relationships being regarded so high, and this is valid. It's a valid reason, but it's always a challenge whether or not you can actually get this commitment and stability.
Yeah.
Everyone wants, well, for the most part, you want someone to be committed to you as well as you're committed to them.
Mm-hmm.
And from some aspect of all things, stability is probably important when it comes to you moving through your life. You don't want to be having to worry about every little thing every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Sometimes that relationship can provide you both of those.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's needs and wants are different,
Yep.
but I would hope that everybody at least feels the need for commitment.
You know, some crazies out there don't want that commitment.
Well, they're probably not in a long-term relationship.
Well, the other part about that too is, I think
Or
their
what
point
if-
in their life
Yeah.
plays a role in that.
What's the definition of their commitment?
It changes for everyone else, right?
Right? Yeah.
I mean, I know some people who,
My commitment to you is seeing you once a month.
yeah. I mean, I know some people who weren't committed to anything until they started to get much older. And then what happens? Father Time starts saying, hey, listen, you're going to be a lonely old soul if you don't get your stuff together.
Yeah.
And then that's when they're like, all right, well, listen, one, I'm trying to do all this stuff out here by myself. It's hard to be stable in today's environment when it's just me. Two, I go home and ain't nobody there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, I would think that part's important to everybody. Same as stability. You don't want to know what, you don't want to be, you don't want every day to be an unknown on where the relationship is even going.
yeah.
Oh, so today we're fine. Tomorrow it's a different story.
And tomorrow you're going to be alone. Just like you were today. Anyway, the short of this whole conversation is that there are so many things in this world that are overrated. And in many cases, aspects of relationships are not exempt from that. And I'm not saying that being in relationships is a bad thing. It's quite the opposite. I just think that when we talk about certain things, the expectation behind those needs to be properly measured. Mm-hmm. Because if you haven't had the experience or you're going off someone else's experience, you can end up in a situation where you are extremely disappointed because love didn't turn out the way that you expected or didn't measure up to the standards that you had set in your mind.
Yeah.
Now that we've gotten over all those overrated aspects of the relationship, let's get into something that is not overrated. And that's my realization of the week.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you what my realization of the week is. And you have to listen to it completely because it contradicts all the things that I've always been saying.
Are you saying I don't listen to you completely?
Yes. My realization this week is this. My imperfections make me perfect. Situationally, now let me explain. By understanding that I am not perfect, it provides me the opportunity to work on those things in those areas where I need work, which allows me to grow and learn to make me a better version of myself. If I didn't have that realization, or if I walked around like I was perfect, I wouldn't have that desire or strive to be a better version of myself. So in a sense, my imperfections make me perfect because they drive me to work on myself to be a better version of myself.
That's great that you say that. I'll put together a list for suggestions.
Well, listen, as Sandy puts together that list, we're going to end this conversation. Please be sure to follow us and leave feedback. Thank you for listening, and we hope you join us on our next conversation.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.